Have you ever found yourself thinking about thinking, as if suddenly you were in a mental tunnel where the past, the future, and uncertainty collide at a speed you can't control? You're lying in bed, your body still, but your mind racing. One part is reliving an old mistake, another is calculating tomorrow, and a third is just worried, for no reason, endlessly. This is not uncommon. It is the new normal. We live in an age where silence has become uncomfortable and the mind a constant battlefield. Thinking has become synonymous with being alive. But what if this is just an illusion? What if this excess of thinking is not heightened awareness, but a disguise for escape? A symptom of something deeper, the difficulty of just being. We are conditioned to believe that a restless mind is a productive mind, that being constantly alert is synonymous with competence. But in practice, this permanent state of mental agitation takes its toll. Exhaustion, anxiety, insomnia, lack of presence. You are in your body, but you are not in life. And the scariest part, we have become accustomed to it. We have become accustomed to living as if thinking were our only function. But thinking is a tool, not an identity. And when you carry a sharp tool around with you all the time, sooner or later, it starts to hurt you. The truth is hard but necessary. Overthinking is distancing us from ourselves. And the more we try to understand everything with our minds, the less we feel what really matters. It's no coincidence that your moments of greatest clarity don't come during a crisis of thoughts, but rather in the shower, on a walk, while staring at the ceiling. That's when you stop, and something inside you finally emerges. This video is not about teaching you to stop thinking as a productivity trick. It is an invitation to take an honest look at what is going on inside you, to recognize that the peace you are looking for may be exactly where you have learned to avoid it, in silence. And that maybe, just maybe, what you need most right now is not more mental effort, but space to breathe, a pause to remember that you are still here. And clarity appears when we least expect it, as if it were lurking all along, waiting for just a moment of respite. Because thinking itself is not the problem. The real problem is the insistence on not stopping thinking, as if our survival depended on it. When the mind never silences, thoughts cease to be tools and become noise, a background buzz that consumes our energy without us noticing. Science has shown that we spend more than 47% of our time daydreaming, according to a Harvard study. This means that almost half of our lives are being lived not in the present moment, but in a mental narrative, often about things that have already happened or may never happen. And in this constant movement, consciousness is lost, buried under the weight of excess. Most of the thoughts that occupy us are repetitions, recycled versions of old doubts, fears, and frustrations, like corrupted files that we insist on opening, hoping that one day they will make sense. But they don't. They just take up space. The brain, in its eagerness to predict and control, rescues problems that have already been solved or that never existed. And we, without realizing it, continue to react to these shadows as if they were real threats. That's the trap. We believe we are being productive because we are mentally active. But being mentally active is not the same as being conscious. Being conscious is something else. It is allowing thoughts to pass without each one needing to be followed, investigated, judged. It's realizing that not every thought deserves attention, and more importantly, that you don't have to identify with all of them. In nature, everything breathes in cycles. The sea advances and recedes. The heart speeds up and slows down, but our mind often refuses to retreat. And that's why music changes when you stop analyzing it, Because when you finally turn off your inner voice, what's around you reveals itself. You don't just hear with your ears, but with your whole body. That's what presence is. It's when you stop treating your thoughts as the center of the universe and start seeing the world again, without the lens of control. It's not the absence of activity, it's mindfulness. It's walking in the park and really being there, without carrying the weight of an old argument or the anxious anticipation of what comes next. Thoughts shape your reality, but only if you let them. The paradox is this: the more you react to each thought as if it were a command, the more trapped you become. But when you start observing instead of obeying, you free yourself. Not because you've eliminated your thoughts, but because you've stopped building castles on top of each one. This is the gateway to real awareness, and it opens in silence. Silence is not empty. It is the part of music that gives meaning to the melody. Yet we have been taught to fear it, as if it were a threat to our productivity, our identity, our value. We grow up believing that if we are not thinking about something, we are wasting time. And so we become prisoners of a hyperactive mind, always planning, judging, anticipating. Have you noticed how even moments of rest are accompanied by subtle guilt? It's as if we are indebted to time, owing explanations for every second we simply exist without a defined purpose. This mental pattern, reinforced by years of conditioning, is exhausting. And more than that, it robs us of the present. Living trapped in your own head is like watching life from inside a display window. You see everything, but you can't touch anything. You're at the park, but you're reliving an old argument. You're at home, but your mind is already on tomorrow's emails. And your body, which lives in the present, responds with tension, as if each thought were a real threat. Your breathing shortens, your heart races, and you don't even know why. This confusion between thought and reality is common, but dangerous, because the more we identify with each thought that arises, the further we move away from the living experience. There is no room to feel the moment when every second is filled with a mental narrative. Science shows that a mind in constant rumination activates areas associated with chronic stress and depression. That is why, paradoxically, many only feel relief in moments of distraction, in the shower, on a walk, listening to music without thinking about anything. It is not because these activities are special in themselves, but because, for a brief moment, we stop interfering with the natural flow of consciousness. And in that space that arises between thoughts, life really happens. You smell the coffee, the touch of the wind, the beating of your own heart. There are no judgments, goals, obligations, just presence. You don't need to eliminate your thoughts. You just need to stop treating them as if they were all orders. The mind is noisy, yes, but wisdom does not shout. It whispers. And to hear it, you need to be quiet long enough, because clarity, the kind that really matters, only appears when you stop chasing it. We are addicted to thinking, not by choice, but by habit. A habit so deeply ingrained that silence, when it appears, seems strange, uncomfortable, even dangerous. We are so accustomed to internal noise that stillness becomes suspicious, as if, by not thinking, we are failing to be ourselves. But the paradox is precisely this. The more you try to control your mind with your mind, the further you move away from your own presence. From an early age, we learn to measure our worth by what we produce, even mentally. Thinking has become a symbol of effort, seriousness, competence. If you're not worried, then maybe you're not engaged enough. But this kind of reasoning leads us to invisible exhaustion, a fatigue that doesn't come from the body, but from the insistence on carrying the whole world inside our heads. And the cruelest part is that this mental fatigue is not socially recognized. No one sees the effort of always being in the future, of reviewing every mistake from the past, of trying to predict every reaction, of imagining every outcome. But the body feels it. Anxiety increases, sleep becomes fragmented, mood swings. And all of this happens because we forget that there is a way of being in the world that does not depend on constant thinking. Consciousness does not require effort. It does not need to narrate every gesture, label every sensation, justify every emotion. When you make space between your thoughts, you discover layers of experience that were there all along, waiting to be felt. You notice the subtleties of the moment, how your body adjusts in your chair, how the light comes through the window, how silence has texture. Things that the busy mind never notices. Recent studies in psychology show that the practice of non-judgment combined with mindfulness significantly reduces stress levels and improves mental health. This does not require any spiritual performance. It only requires you to be here, now, without trying to improve, understand, or control the moment. It is in this state that the natural intelligence of the body and consciousness flourishes. That kind of wisdom that doesn't need a list of pros and cons, that doesn't rush to respond just to avoid silence, that doesn't feel the need to prove itself all the time. This wisdom is already within you, but it is buried by excess thinking. Presence is not magic, it is practice. And the more you trust it, the more you realize that thinking all the time is not clarity. It is tension disguised as effort. Real clarity arises when the mind recedes and the body finally aligns with the moment. When this happens, everything in you slows down. And at this slower pace, you realize that you don't need to rush anywhere. We live in a world where stillness has become synonymous with laziness. Being silent is uncomfortable. Doing nothing seems wrong. But there is a big difference between laziness and presence. The former paralyzes, the latter awakens. And it is precisely this difference that few people can perceive, because they have been trained to believe that personal value comes from constant agitation, even if that agitation is purely mental. Have you ever found yourself trying to relax, but your mind was still racing, thinking about how to relax properly, or whether you should be doing something more useful? This kind of tension is subtle but corrosive, because it doesn't scream. It constantly whispers that you're never doing enough, not even when you're trying to rest. The truth is, you don't need to fill every space with thoughts. Sometimes, the answers that matter most come when you stop looking for them, when you give up dissecting every possibility, when you're not trying to fix anything. Some of the best decisions you've ever made probably came from that place. A state of quiet intuition where there was no doubt, just a calm certainty that was difficult to explain in words. This kind of clarity doesn't come from compulsive thinking. It comes from trusting the silence. And that's scary, because silence requires surrender. It asks you to trust something you can't measure or prove right away. But it's where you find the freedom you've been searching for in 1,000 different thoughts. Think about it. You don't have to have an opinion on everything you hear. You don't have to process all the news, predict all the consequences, or respond to every thought that pops into your head. There is strength in not doing. There is power in observing without reacting. The science of human behavior has already shown that people who practice mental self-regulation, that is, who develop the ability to observe their own thoughts without acting impulsively, have higher levels of well-being, more accurate decision-making, and healthier relationships. This is not because these people are more intelligent. It's because they've learned not to fight silence. They've learned to recognize it as an ally, not an absence. And when you start to see thinking as an option, not an obligation, something changes. You realize that not everything needs to be solved right now, that there are times when simply being present is enough, because ultimately the mind can be a sharp tool, but you weren't made to live with the blade always touching your skin. That's why you shouldn't think all the time, not because thinking is an enemy, but because peace doesn't shout, it waits, and it appears when you stop filling every second with noise. There are times when the mind, no matter how fast it is, needs to learn to be quiet so that what really matters can be heard. And that silence, which once seemed uncomfortable, begins to reveal its true form, a refuge, a home, a reminder of who you were before everything got so loud. The next time you feel the urge to fill the silence with some mental activity, breathe. Just breathe. And let the silence linger for a few more seconds. Not for something magical to happen, but to remind your body and your consciousness that there is no need to rush, because what you are searching for so hard may already be there in the pause. Few of us have been taught that we are allowed to just be, without justifying every minute with productivity, without solving problems that don't even exist. Our culture celebrates the loudest voice, the fastest thinking, the busiest mind. But no one talks about the strength of those who choose not to react, not to rush, not to get lost in mental narratives that add nothing. You are not broken. You are tired of living mentally in excess, and that is different. The peace you seek is not in the next course, the next book, or the next perfect plan. It is beneath the noise, waiting for you to remember what it is like to exist without having to explain yourself. And when silence arrives, do not treat it like an intruder. Welcome it like an old friend, because it will remind you of what has always been with you, even when you forgot, your deepest, most stable, most present consciousness. If this video touched you in any way, if it brought clarity in a moment of noise, please like it and write the word silence in the comments to show YouTube that this content has value. These actions, besides being simple, help this content reach those who may be going through exactly what you have been through. And if you feel it in your heart, consider leaving a donation of any amount. Your help strengthens this work. In the end, sometimes all someone needs is a little moment of silence to remember that they are not alone.